Hi guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Lando Norris weathers the storm in Australia to win the first round of the season and end Max Verstappen's 63 race lead of the World Championship. Max, though, as ever, despite the car situation on track today, kept it very competitive. A disaster for Oscar Piastri, but especially for Ferrari today. The wet setup they talked about, where did that materialise? Again, on strategy, they let themselves down. Some phenomenal drives of the day. The FIA tried to ruin it with some controversial safety car moments. Lots to get into. Very much into your thoughts. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. As always, we smashed through 70k subs as well over the last couple of days. Massively appreciate all of you. Let's get the season underway, baby. We're going to start right about here. Liam Lawson started in the pit lane because of a rear suspension or rear wing change, and of course the rear wing did not last the Grand Prix for Lawson, as with many of the rookies, as we shall get into right about now. So the race gets underway. This was actually the first formation lap, and within just about one corner, poor Isaac Hadjar was in the wall. Now look, Hadjar is clearly a talented driver, all of these guys are. But I think by the end of the Grand Prix, there was one rookie who really stood out today. And in many respects, it was kind of the rookie that I think I expected to stand out today. Other rookies, unfortunately, had a far more challenging time, including Hadjar, who lasted approximately half a corner, because he goes into the first turn on the formation lap, lights up the rears and is in the wall. And like, there was lots of talk about the torque delivery and everything, letting the rears spin. Look, sure, that's how these cars are. A lot of the rookies were suffering with that today. It wasn't just the rookies. Other drivers, I mean, Stint, we'll see in a second, he was in the wall as well. He's a very experienced driver and he'll be gutted given the result that Alex Albon amazingly got today in the Williams, kind of replicating some of the phenomenal performances that Albon has had around here in the Williams over the last couple of years and getting even better today. But yeah, I feel bad for Hadjar, man, of course. He was in the wall immediately, breaks the rear wing. His race was over one corner and it would have been a great learning opportunity and experience, I think, for Hadjar today as well, to actually get the full Grand Prix distance under his belt. But even if he'd survived this incident on the formation lap, would he have survived the Grand Prix? Maybe not, based on what happened, right? This was Hadjar. I mean, like, he's obviously devastated, right? And I thought it was a really nice touch from Anthony Hamilton, of course, Lewis's father, because, like, Lewis is pretty much Hadjar's hero. He's made that quite clear. And for him to get consoled in this way by Anthony, look, I hope there's still a bright future ahead for Hadjar, but it doesn't help in terms of the pressure today. But then again, he's not in the main Red Bull team, and the pressure is certainly higher for Liam Lawson after today's result and where Max Verstappen ended up finishing the Grand Prix. The race gets underway and immediately Doohan is in the wall as well. Very similar story, lights up the rears a little bit too much. I mean, like, getting on the white lines, that's the other thing about Australia when it rains. There's so many white lines, cycling tracks, all these things that the paint on the track does not, the tyres don't like the paint, certainly the Inters don't. And you can slide on those very easily, and it's impossible to avoid the white lines though on this track because they're everywhere, right? So yeah, I think it was the upshifting that was, like, when they upshift, it would just change the torque profile of the car slightly, and in those incredibly treacherous greasy conditions, that was enough for Doohan, and then Sainz off into the barrier at the final corner. Big story for Sainz, right, given how well Williams were looking, and they'll still end the day happy, but it could have been even better. And the comeback story for Williams this year is looking so exciting. I've loved following this story. I mean, I said it to you guys probably a month or so ago when Williams, you know, the first kind of discussions around Williams were happening, that they were a serious team to watch, and, you know, here they are getting P4 at the first Grand Prix. I think for Doohan, though, it's probably worse, isn't it? Let's be real, because he was under serious pressure from Colapinto that is exacerbated only today. The race gets back underway. Also worth noting that Verstappen made a great move around the outside of Piastri at the first corner to actually get up into seconds and give himself a chance of potentially winning this Grand Prix. This was Antonelli after overtaking Hulkenberg. He overtook him and then he spot off a few corners later and then overtook him again. Of course, Antonelli started the day in P16 and made some solid progress. I mean, look, he was obviously in a far faster car than some of the drivers around him, but he was still one of the only drivers to actually be able to make any progress in the intermediate conditions, because I know that DRS was activated relatively swiftly, and fair play to the FIA and the stewards for that, because, you know, I thought race direction might hold off, let's say, on activating DRS. They've certainly done that before. It did improve the quality of the racing, the fact that they turned it on today, and Antonelli was one of the only men really to be able to cabotage. I mean, men, I say, he's still really a kid, really, isn't he? But he's old enough to compete, right? He's 18, so I guess he counts. This was Verstappen, though. As the race went on, the McLarens, and this may turn out to be a defining feature of the season, and it was the case at times last year as well, they can manage their tyres in an RB19-esque way. And I know there will be questions even from other teams as to how this is even possible. But at this stint in the Grand Prix, Verstappen was losing grip. He locked up here his front left into the final, I think this is turn 11. Piastri takes the second place. I mean, look, I want to get into the Ferrari stuff in a second. I guess we'll do that right about now. But the stints that McLaren had from that point to the end of the race, at least for the rest of that stint, was mesmerizingly impressive, and both of the drivers. This was Ferrari on the radio, by the way, and Ferrari's radio messages again today were, interesting to say the least. I mean, we got Leclerc talking about there being a leakage. It seems like his drinks bottle probably spilled or something. It's not a bottle exactly, but you know what I'm saying. And I mean, the radio comms were hilarious. But equally, on the other side of the radio, Hamilton was basically getting into it with his own engineer, right? Because his engineer was on the radio a lot saying, use the deployment, use K1, use the DRS here, use the DRS there, you need to be faster here and there. And Hamilton was asking for some feedback, but then was quite swiftly letting Riccardo Adami know, like, look, shut up. I don't want to listen to you right now. Let me concentrate on trying to figure out how to get past Alex Albon here and use, the track that I've got to the advantage. Leclerc made a nice start. He got a couple of places ahead, but even then the pace from the Ferrari was nowhere in this wet setup that they apparently adopted for the weekends. So Leclerc was like, look, I'm learning the car. Leave me to it, mate. But again, for Ferrari, Adami and the engineers were all over the radio when it came to when the race was pretty static and everyone knew what was happening. As soon as the rain came, as soon as the drama arrived, then all of a sudden Ferrari were lost on the radio, right? Like, that's how I read it anyway. Again, welcome to Ferrari, Lewis Hamilton. I think that is the name of the game today. This was crazy though. I mean, as I say with the pace, on the 26th lap of the Grand Prix, Norris and Piastri were in the 1:29.1s. Verstappen was over a second slower. Russell was a second slower. Leclerc was 1.2 seconds slower. That's all tyres at the end of the day. That's all how they're treating and keeping the tyres warm and in the right window. Now, this was a bit dramatic. Piastri was told to hold position. This was a point in the Grand Prix where I think he felt he was faster, and it certainly looked like he was faster. He was closing in on Lando. Looks like the overtake was potentially on at this time. But they didn't allow it to happen. They told Piastri, no, hold position, wait until we switch to the slick tyres, which was coming soon. And then, that's when you guys will be free to fight. The funny thing is, Piastri then went on to make a mistake a couple of laps later, went off here at turn 6, I think, fell a couple of seconds back, and then they were like, oh yeah, sure, if you want to race, that's absolutely fine. But look at the deltas here, right? Verstappen was in third. Everyone else was kind of miles behind. Antonelli had made some progress up through the field into 11th. Lawson wasn't really doing much. The Hasses were struggling. Again, for the Haas, it was a bit of a shambles. This was the key defining moment of the race, though, in many respects. If Fernando Alonso put it in the wall, it looked like it was going to be relatively straightforward. But the teams at this point were already eyeing on their radar let's say rain in the distance that was approaching very rapidly and also defines the Grand Prix in many respects. So Alonso in the wall, again, if you'd have had to, made me guess which of the two Aston Martins would end in the wall today, I wouldn't have said Alonso, but it was him, and actually Stroll historically has done and continues to do rather well around here. So safety car strikes, lap 34, seems like the perfect moment to turn it around, put on the slick tyres, go to the end of the race. That's what Norris does. That's what everybody does, with the exception of Haas. They're the only team that didn't pit. Now, interestingly enough, Verstappen went on to the medium tyres here. Everyone else went to the hards, pretty much. There was a couple of medium choices. As I say, the funny thing was that Ocon and Behrman both stayed out on the Inter because they knew that there was some rain coming again. The frustrating thing, I think, for Haas will be that they changed their minds. They bottled it, basically. The safety car here lasted forever, and this is expected at Albert Park. It's a street circuit in some respects. Access roads are difficult. Getting, the cars off the track is a challenge. But it was a massive point of controversy during the race that we have to spend some time discussing, especially this screenshot here, which is, the safety car of Bert Myland are actually going off the road to not really get in the way of this recovery vehicle, and here's Lando Norris driving right past it. Now, this doesn't really look good, especially with what we know in the past with Jules Bianchi and other such incidents, that, the FIA need to be careful in these type of situations, and there were many calls here that they should have red flagged the Grand Prix. Personally, I don't necessarily agree with those calls for the red flag. I know that the safety cars lasted lasted forever and we lost, several racing laps that maybe we could otherwise have had. But if you're going to red flag the race every time there's a recovery vehicle on the track, you're never really going to complete a Grand Prix. Actually, the point of the safety car is for when there is a recovery vehicle on the track to make sure that the drivers and everyone stays safe. The Jules Bianchi incident was not under a safety car. That was like localized yellow flags. And I mean, look, that was a different incident that we should and we have learned an awful lot from, and a tragic one at that. But it's not quite the same as what's happened here. In fact, look, this doesn't look great. Sure, I get it. And the FIA may have to have some thinks about whether they could have done something different here. But still, it's kind of the point of the safety car, and it's not like Norris is driving especially quickly here. I know that it is slippery conditions on slick tyres. Sure, the drivers have to be careful, but sometimes that's how it can be in Formula 1, and it's not like they were driving in absurd speeds here, right? Under, let's say, virtual safety car conditions, where they're still driving fast, that would not be acceptable. So, I don't know, I think it's a controversial one. I'm kind of more of the side to say this was actually probably okay. It's just how it is around circuits like this sometimes, and I think if you're red flagging for incidents like this, it's not going to be a good idea. It's going to ruin the races a lot of the time in future if you make that some sort of a precedent. That's my take. You guys may disagree and tweet your thoughts in the comments below, but this is how it's shaped out. So Norris, Piastri, Verstappen, Russell, Leclerc, Tsunoda, Albon, and Hamilton. So it was all kind of as standard at this time. They'd all basically pitted. But when things got controversial was because the rain was still coming in. Now this was beared frustratingly to me, and I'm sure to Haas. They bottled it, right? They decided just before the safety car was going to end that actually, no, we do need to be on the slick tyres. So they just ruined they made a gamble. They ruined the gamble. They gave themselves no chance of it working. And guess what? The race gets back underway. But McLaren, and the funny thing was that it was McLaren, the team, that was first pushing the narrative to their drivers about, it was at least the first radio comms we got, that, hey, there's rain coming and heavy rain at that in just a few laps. McLaren were the guys that knew about this, and maybe understandably though, given that they were first to the scene, they were the guys to get, let's just say have a difficult time as a result of it. So Norris and Piastri, they're leading. Norris put some insane pace down on these first few laps, super impressive for me, and if it is going to be a championship fight between the two McLarens, if Max isn't able to hold on, if the Ferraris aren't able to get into the mix, I think Norris proved today that he can handle the pressure in a way that maybe he couldn't last season. I was very impressed by Lando today. Very few mistakes, especially in tricky conditions. And especially on this moment of the Grand Prix where he was like, okay, Hammer needs to go down here. It might go to Inters. We've got to build a gap. He really just built a serious lead on Piastri. This, though, was the screenshot. So at this time, the rain is coming down and it hit heavy and it hit hard only in Sector 3. So Lando and Oscar, they arrived to this final corner of the track, this final section, and they had no grip on these hard tyres. Lando was off the road, nearly into the wall. He saved it, though, better than Piastri did. And by the time Piastri got back, pretty much Lando just went on the gravel, whereas Oscar was on the gravel and then on the grass. Then when he came back on the track, he had no grip, he slid off the road, and Verstappen, who saw all this kind of unfolding in front of him and was more careful, he capitalised, and he was on the mediums, which give you substantially more grip in conditions where there is no grip. So probably a good call there from Red Bull on some respects to choose the tyre that they did. Piastri was off the road, it looked like he was going to be out of the Grand Prix. He did manage to actually make it back onto the track, but by this time he was way down the field. I mean, even look at this, the timing graphic has indicated Piastri is out of the race, which is kind of remarkable. I didn't even notice that at the time. I'm just seeing that now for the first time. And he made it back and actually scored points at the end of the day, which is kind of crazy. Now, you can't quite see this on the screenshots here, but it was raining heavily at this point. But I mean, have a look at the top left-hand side of the timing tower. You'll see that everyone has basically gone to the intermediate, apart from a select few drivers. And those drivers include Hamilton, Leclerc, and Tsunoda. So the pace today for Ferrari was kind of non-existent. Their tyres were struggling in the wet as well, and they made the decision that they were going to stay out. They were going to risk it, and they were going to see what happened, basically, at this point. Tsunoda also stayed out, unfortunately for him. And Hamilton actually led a lap of this Grand Prix. I mean, look at this moment here. The yellow flag, we're just about to see what that was caused by. We actually already saw it, but we'll get back to that in a second. So Hamilton actually led the lap here briefly on the hard tyres. Lando had pitted, and Verstappen then realised, yeah, this is way too wet. It's going to be into to the end of the race. We have to box as well. Both of the Ferraris, I mean, Leclerc spun it around, but both of them stayed out. I thought it was an interesting call for both to stay out. Like, they were kind of just hoping that the rain wouldn't be bad enough and they'd be able to capitalise. But taking the risk with both drivers, I wasn't sure that was the play. And Hamilton ends up leading a lap, but it becomes very clear that this is not the right gamble, and they had to come into the box and fit the inters and drop way back in terms of position. The same thing affected Tsunoda, unfortunately. That's what screwed his race. He also didn't box here and had to box at the same time the Ferraris did. And, I mean, to be honest, if the safety car hadn't have happened, they had a big lead, but it would have been eaten into anyway. The safety car happening, that like basically cooked Ferrari, because at that point there was no chance and they had to box and drop back in the field. And then we got another spate really of rookie instance with Lawson and Bortoletto both in the wall and in the barriers in a very similar way to some of their previous rookies. So, you know, of all the rookies, not many survived it today. Behrman survived and Antonelli thrived, quite frankly, and we'll get to him in a second. So this is Hamilton coming into the box, putting on the inters, effectively giving up the Grand Prix. And as Hamilton says, you know, I thought you said it wasn't going to rain much. We lost a big opportunity, right? Like, other teams seemed more aware than Ferrari that it was going to be as, let's just say, tricky and treacherous as it actually was. And yeah, Hamilton wasn't very happy about it, understandably. The race was then just about to restart for the final stint. Lando mentioned that there was something off with his steering, and, you know, of course, that was making people somewhat concerned. And at this point in the Grand Prix, and it actually stayed true until the end, kicks Sauber, outscoring Ferrari, because Nico Hulkenberg found himself in a spectacular position. The race then restarts. Lando holds the lead, did a good job on the restarts today. Leclerc goes around the outside of Hamilton at turn 1. I think it wasn't even like Hamilton's fault. It was just a great move from Leclerc to get the move done around the outside. Then it became the inside of turn 2. He took the lead at this moment. It was Piastri making his way up through the field here after Gasly went off the track and got overtaken by both of the Ferraris. And all of a sudden, though, Norris was right under pressure from Max Verstappen. Like, Max was clearly throwing caution to the wind to some degree, trying to get this race win won. And this is the thing with Verstappen, right? I mean, Lawson's out of the race. Lawson had no pace today. And Verstappen, on that stint towards the end of the Inters, had no pace either compared to the McLarens. But Max is always going to be there. He's always going to make, and Red Bull tend to always make the strategy calls. And it's why I think potentially this Grand Prix could be a bit of a microcosm of the season. Ferrari were nowhere. I think Ferrari will get there at some points. They always tend to. Mercedes were impressive, but frankly not quite quick enough. If it is going to be a battle between the two McLaren guys, I'm always going to pick Lando in that fight, and today has proved no exception. But you can never count out Verstappen, right? So he got within 0.6. One mistake from Lando, Max would have won this Grand Prix with all the chaos that happens. But Lando did very well to hold on. This, though, on the left-hand side, as you see, only 14 drivers even are still in the Grand Prix at this point. But Antonelli up to 4th place. He got Albon, which was a mega move, honestly. Now, unfortunately for Antonelli, he had an unsafe release. So we got a 5-second penalty and ended up dropping down to 5th. But this was interesting to me that Leclerc and, I mean, Piastri actually gets overtaken, or Piastri overtakes Hamilton here, but Leclerc wasn't really closing in or making that much impression even on Hulkenberg, which was kind of crazy to think about, a Ferrari versus a Sauber on the day. And this was the final corner with Piastri going around the outside of Hamilton. He actually clipped and broke Hamilton's front wing on the way through here. I mean, look, Hamilton P9, P10, at the end of the day, it was just an absolute shambles from Ferrari regardless. And Lando Norris comes over the line to win a chaotic Australian Grand Prix. At times it was pretty dull, there wasn't much happening, it was all kind of in one stint, and then all chaos broke loose. And very impressive that given these type of races, let's say Canada last year, for example, that were dramatic and had rain and other incidents going on, these are the type of races that Max Verstappen tends to win. And, well, today he didn't, and Lando Norris managed to hold him off. But even just a few laps behind, you know, after the safety car, look at the gap that was formed for the front runners down to Russell, right? Like, these cars are, in race conditions, maybe not as equal as we might have hoped them to be before the season began, right? But Lando wins the Grand Prix. What a race it was. Alex Albon, unreal drive to finish P4. I think Antonelli P5 and P16 was potentially my standout from the day. Lance Stroll in P6 deserves, I think, some serious credit as well. And Max Verstappen's streak at the top of the World Championship comes to an end after over 1,000 days. So many storylines to start the season. We've got a lot to discuss over the coming days as well. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. I'd appreciate it. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.